Okay. Education in any framework has always been about holistic learning. So I don't think, Rakhi, that this is a new normal, so to say. It is holistic. I think when you take a look at the various drafts of this particular a new education policy that has come in, the first two drafts, whether it was by Subramaniam and then later on by Kasturi Rangan, you go through it, there has been a number of consultations. And each draft, there has been changes that have been brought in by these widespread consultations. I have also been on a few fringe consultations, so I know it has been very consultative. The process has been very consultative. So because of that consultative process, we have come to the word holistic. And when we say holistic, I think the largest point here is that you're looking at a knowledge which is developed through hands-on experiential learning that has come in a major sort of way, which is life skill education, some kind of skill building education, and also multidisciplinarity. For example, a student who is doing chemistry can also go on to learning baking, or a student who is doing physics can learn music. There are connections between these two, although they are from different disciplines. So how can you bring about that multidisciplinarity? So I think in that sense, multidisciplinarity becomes one of the major, you can say, definitional points of holistic learning. Multidisciplinarity, life skill education, and skill building. These become a large part of holistic education. The other part of holistic education which is coming in is that we understand that you have this whole idea of learning through the region, like languages, different languages, the 3 language formula as it is called, or learning your regional languages. That is also holistic learning, learning from people around you, learning your own language. So in that sense, that is also, they have something that they have focused on. Beyond that, I think holistic learning is is breaking the binary between the teacher and the taught. So the pedagogical tools that they are talking about, whether it is online or it is flipped classrooms, or it is, looking at various interactive learning, which is not just about a lecture-based learning. All of that, again, is about breaking the binaries between student and teacher. So the student also is an active learner as well as a facilitator of knowledge. So I would like to understand holistic knowledge from this perspective, that holistic knowledge here means multidisciplinarity. It means developing critical thinking, which is coming in not just from the teacher, but also from the taught, the so-called taught, who is now a part of the active learning, and that it is about experiential learning, which is from the field skill building, and also bringing in a certain so-called, let's say, an ethos, which is grounded. And I wouldn't say only national, it's also regional. Because India is so diverse.
Yeah. So we have a lot to, we have a lot to understand.
Yes.
Yeah. So lots to understand from you, but I would really like to also go to Dr. Mercy, because when you're talking about education, you're also talking not only from the central or national perspective, you have to also look at states. So of course you are in JNU, Dr. Mercy, and you're teaching German, but how would you also look at, and I really want to take this up, let's say a region like Northeast, where education is very, very important in a way, because it really needs, all-rounded development. We are talking about the development of the state, and education is the key factor. So with your experience, Dr. Mercy, how would you look at this coordination also that now will come about when we're talking about the new education policy 2020?
She needs to be unmuted.
Yeah, so this is one of the things, Dr. Mercy.
You need to be unmuted. Right.
Hello, thank you. Right. Yeah, I was unmute. I don't know who muted me. Anyway, so thank you, and hi, Dr. Nanda. It's really nice to meet you, and
nice to meet you.
Yeah, and all the other participants. And I'm really glad, and I would really thank Her World, and also really a pleasure to be in a part of this very important discussion, which is the National Education Policy. It is not only important, I think, like Rakhi rightly put and Anushka in her introductory speeches, it is not only important for us as be it DU or be it JNU or Jamia or wherever in the universities all over the country, not only as partakers in the education system, I think it is important to really discuss all these matters. Already you've discussed about holistic multidisciplinarity and all that. So I would say it is also important because it really can change the whole future course of the country. And it is also important if we look at this idea of holistic multidisciplinarity, inclusive education. I would like to pinpoint the thing that you have just talked about, implementation. Besides implementation and coordination, I think for the Northeast region particularly, it is important for us to look at the ground realities, In the ground realities, why I say this is because I'll come back to Dr. Nanda's point of 3 regional languages, or having the instruction or the medium of instruction in the mother tongue. What is important is for us to understand in the Northeast that the Northeast has a plethora of ethnic diversity, languages, multilingual society. And my question would be, as an experienced teacher and particularly reigning from the regions of the Northeast, so whose language, whose mother tongue? It doesn't necessarily mean that when a teacher is capable of, or when a teacher can speak a particular language or several languages, it really doesn't mean that you are capable of teaching in that particular language, giving instruction in that particular language. So there is that issue and that challenge coming in when we talk about the 3-language formula. Number 2, I would say my great concern is also related to the whole idea of how are you going to provide published books in several subjects? Hello? How are you going to provide the particular subject related books in that regional or mother tongue languages? See, we all know that the Anganwadi and the whole the regional, the villages, the schools, the small town schools, and all have already taken up the initiatives of multidisciplinarity, inclusive studies and everything. But if to really look into the ground reality, and that would be my emphasis today in our discussion, the document is very promising and it is a very welcome change. It is an overhaul in the education system. It is a very welcome change. I am not disagreeing with that. It is very promising, but only if they're in the implementation and also in the coordination. So how are you going to coordinate the central universities and then way down to the grassroots levels of pre-primary sections to, the secondary level of higher education? So these are really problematic also and big concerns that you have to bring across in a discussion where you talk about, see, for example, in my own experience in a university like JNU, which has faced a lot of, how do you say, with the current dispensation. I mean, now then having JNU, if a central university is challenged with the whole issue of catering to the SEDs, and SEDs as in socioeconomic disadvantaged groups of the students. We had the recent case of the fee hike, all of us protested against the fee hike. So all these actually do come in the education policy that we see today. If we read it carefully, like they say, the devil lies in the details. Now, it is this detail that I'm really concerned about in the education policy. That would be all that I have to submit for now, and then we can carry on the discussion. Yeah.
Sure. So there are a lot of questions, and coming now to Dr. Nanda, many things actually. I think I really think that we'll have to have another session maybe, because of course in the later part of this program we'll also have question and answer session where you'll have lots of questions waiting for you to answer anyways from students and some other participants. How would you look at, for example, looking at the whole global village and where India wants to take the knowledge hub? How would you look at foreign universities now having their campuses in India and the Indian universities vis-a-vis going abroad and showcasing themselves? How would you look at the whole higher education spectrum and it's going to see a change, so to say, when we're talking about taking our education level in the country to another level altogether, and we're taking a step ahead according to the policy.
I would agree with Mercy that a large part, Dr. White, is that correct? Yes.
Yes, Guite.
Okay, Guite. Thank you for that submission. I think it is that the devil lies in the details. It's in the implementation. But see, this is a vision document. So we may not see a lot of it unfurling immediately. A lot of it will take the standard operating procedures, how it will work, what will happen, and also, you know, many of these things will be discussed at the state level. You know, education being a state subject, there will be a lot of discussions around that. So it is a policy. And how will that policy be carried forward? There will be several consultations, several ways of relooking. For example, even on languages, if you may have noted, the minister has come up with a clarification that we are not imposing anything. Please take a look at it. So I think we have to be very careful not to start reading a lot in between the lines, and to see it mostly as a vision document, to see how it will be thrashed out. As far as internationalization of education, yes, I think it's very exciting that you're thinking of this kind of a, you know, cross exchange of knowledge. However, you know, when it comes to education, we also have to be careful, because the diversity and the inclusion and the rest of it that we speak about in India, the kind of funded education, you know, and also the government has given a clear understanding that we will not be increasing fees, and we will be looking at keeping education at a level where everybody can be a part of it. So if you are looking at a massification of education, then, and having private institutions come in, how are you going to work that out? I think it has to be very clearly laid down. What are the ways in which we will be choice? So if it is done pro bono, we are very happy about it. I mean, that's excellent. If our students of Miranda House get to go to, let's say, Harvard University, and we get a student from Harvard University here, and the choice credits or whatever is worked out in such a way. Many times we have had collaborations with foreign universities, and in those foreign universities, we could not send our students because we could not pay their fees. Whereas for them, our fees is very limited. And even if we, you know, like we were able to write off their fees, asking for a similar exchange on the other side, what happened is that the similar exchange on the other side still meant flight tickets, stay, the rest of it. So whatever you cut out, that was very, very expensive. So if it is going to be completely covered, if you are looking at financial support to students, I mean, the major thing will lie in the way in which it will be budgeted. And we are looking at 6%, which is excellent. But we may need to look at infrastructural support and large scale, what I would call pro bono exchanges. On our side, it's very good because it's state funded, so we can provide them. But if they do the same and completely match us, then it's wonderful. But if it is not, it is going to be difficult, because then you will again run into the same issues as it is there. Then you can look at only online, you know, support systems, not actual exchange.
Are you saying then, and as you also said, and we all understand that, you know, there are more deeper details which will come out, you know, as time passes by, and this
not deeper details, there will also be discussions and debates, and it will come through a process of consultations again, because it is not as if all the details are there and we are only looking at a vision document. So I would think we should not be ready to, I mean, I would go either way. I mean, there's no need to get worried about a lot of things. Some of it we need to be conscious about. Yeah. And also look at it with hope, and hope that certain factors, which I think Mercy also pointed out, Dr. Mercy, that some of it is extremely stimulating and exciting. And if actually it comes about, then it's wonderful. But it also says they are looking at a phase till 2040. So you are looking at that much. So you have to give them that space, really.
I think this can be one of the answers, because, you know, I was seeing that a lot of students and people, they were very curious as to how it will unfold. So I think there is a time, I think there is a lot of time that, we know, all these voices will be, different voices which are now coming up will be heard. And as you rightly said, Dr. Nanda, consultation would take place, and maybe details where there are different viewpoints will be understood and taken ahead. Keeping in mind that the whole idea, if you look at the broader framework of NEP. So the whole idea when we are saying that there would be vocational approach to it, this 5+3+3+4, instead of 10+2, looking at board exams, making it made simpler. I mean, the whole idea of also inculcating, other activities while a student is learning, as you rightly said, beyond the classroom kind of approach, where the personality as such of a student develops multifold. You're talking about multidisciplinarity. But so how would you really look at these new elements being really inserted in new education policy, when we're also looking at, for example, the digital record of students, National Testing Agency, a new feature that we're hearing about. How would you look at this whole new student coming up armed with skills, armed with vocational abilities? How do you look at, the new educational atmosphere going ahead? Dr. Nanda and Dr.
Okay.
I thought your question was for,
I really thought it was for Dr. Nanda, but can I take this over, Dr. Nanda?
Please do. Let's have one question for each person. It helps that.
So, like we rightly discussed, then before answering this whole idea of vocational skilled trained development in the school system of the 5+3+3+4 and the 4-year, exit and entry, different exit and entry levels in the graduation program, I'd like to just make one clarification on the part of the language, the regional language that we discussed. I said that particularly in terms of the rising internal migration, which is actually happening not only in Delhi, it is also happening in states like the southern states, the northern states, even in the northeast, then you have internal migration from other parts of the country. So that really creates a big question mark. That is just my concern. It is not, being hyper, unnecessarily. We will wait. And on the discussion part, what I feel is that if it was for a discussion and a debate, I really wished that the document would have been presented in a parliamentary discussion, if possible. I know these are, trying times and it's a time of a pandemic, but such an important document, which really is important for the whole country, I think this needs to be discussed and debated before having been passed in the cabinet meetings. That is my submission. That is all in the previous discussion. Now let me come to the vocational part. This is a really welcomed change. I would say it's paradigmatic. Also, I would say this whole idea of introducing vocational training from the standard of class 6 enables, especially, and I'm concentrating in the Northeast, by saying that the Northeast, I do not try to paint, the whole Northeast in one brush, because there are different challenges in every state. Every state has its own, difficulties, and infrastructurally, financially, So what I'm trying to say is, if you're introducing vocational courses, skill-developed vocational courses, I think it will actually help and benefit the students coming from economically and socially, backward classes pertaining to the Northeast, and it will be an impetus for those students who could not, and the families who could not provide, financial assistance for further studies, for example. And when we talked about, international universities coming in at the higher universities and central universities, that itself is already a challenge for people of SEDGs. There I think then vocational trained or skill development courses would be great. But having said that, in the same line, this will be my last point, then again to the intricacies, the intricacies of how are you going to implement vocational training skill development courses? How are you going to bring in experts? Are we going to train experts in these particular fields? Do we have experiential field work already done? And especially in the states of the Northeast, where you have district colleges, you have schools, rural villages which have let's say 10 to 15 number of schools, but on the other hand, the document talks about merging all these small schools in the neighborhood into another big schools, you know. So there the challenges and the balancing points are always there. That I know that this document is really welcome, promising, it's an overhaul, but I would rather than stick to what my emphasis is on the implementation part. The implementation will equally be challenging even if it is for the vocationally introduced skill development courses. Over to you, Rakhi or Dr. Nanda.
So Dr. Nanda, any words from you before I take up the next question?
I think it's important for us to also engage, and I agree with Dr. Mercy that it is important for us to engage with the kind of vocational trainings that will be available. Although I'm sure the document I have not read the whole document, so I may not be able to comment on it, but the kind of skill development and also the idea, whether these are employable skills. One is whether they are critical learning skills. That adds to holistic knowledge. I really see holistic knowledge from the point of view of whether you have critical learning. So if critical learning is increased by your skill building, fine. But if it is skill building, then is it employable? Are there forward linkages with the market? Because we as a higher educational institution, there's a lot of pressure for placements. So if you're looking at placements, then these must be employable skills. Therein, I think two ways of involvement. One, maybe from those who are employing, they should play a role. They should be a part of this process. Again, that should come in through corporate social responsibility if possible. Because how else will these students go ahead? What are these employable skills? Because if you end up doing the same, checklist or laundry list of skill building courses, they may not be employable in the market. And every day as we speak, the market is changing. So how are you going to bring that up? So how can you bring it about on a national level? I, for one, just because I am in a particular place, let me just, in Miranda House, we are also thinking on this. We are thinking, what are the employable skills? Now the employable skills would be more from the IT sector. Maybe that's one learning that we can give our students, or we are doing a needs assessment with our students. Well, I mean, also I don't like to generically call it the Northeast as if problems are generic. But since I also come from somewhere in the East, like Orissa, I know that there are distinctions between every region. And how are you going to apply that? How will you apply that knowledge? The other point is the diversity of not just of issues that are there in the region, but also the diversities of situations. Situations. Okay. What are the situations? Where are you located? How do you, not just in geographical ways, in spatial ways, as a gender person, as gender being your location, or disability being a location. How will you bring that about? I think it will require, and I hope, and that is our hope. I mean, I am going to exist on hope. Like all of us are saying, it's a great document. We are very happy with it. So how are we going to work on those points? That would be my major concern at this stage. I think that's one. And the other one point that you had raised, Rakhi, I'm trying to remember what was that point. I think it was a point in the beginning when you had asked me about internationalization of education. And I gave you only an example or an anecdotal understanding. Internationalization of education also has to be worked out. And we have consistently thought of internationalization as American universities or the Western world. But we should also think of the South Asian region, because we have a lot in common, and the South Asian universities and others can also be brought to the platform. And how can we learn? So a creative learning can also be through that process. And we have a South Asian university here, but that could be far more critical learning, especially on gender, especially on ideas around media, far more commonalities between us. So can we bring about, and at this point, the emphasis would be on collaboration and not competition. That is how universities have to function.
I'll have to take this, which is a point or theme that we're very passionate about. You and I think we also, and that's why we are here with Her World, is about equity, equality, and we're talking about inclusivity. So talking about this aspect, because I was trying to go through and I saw that, whether it is about Divyang students or people who are differently able to children who should be, their health and nutrition should be also looked at. How they're growing up along with education is also something that focus is there, I think, in the new education policy. So, and that's where, you know, we see a lot of hope. It's integrated learning. It's like integrated development of a student who's trying to study, make a career out of the study, but at the same time also becoming a very good citizen, for example. So, so how would you look at, and that's where, you know, the complexities are being done away with. For example, a certain MPhil, for example, that has not been there. There are some other new features coming in, new testing standards, for example, which I mentioned. I mean, there are new features and old features which were found at, you know, for example, the UGC or AICT, you know, being, you know, dismantled kind of thing. So how do you look at the whole growth part of a student who should be the future citizen, also packed with digital learning?
You want
I think there are two aspects I could come.
So I think let Dr. Mercy go first, because I was thinking let's do a round. So let her go first and then I will come in.
Sure, Dr. Mercy.
Okay. I was actually still pondering upon the points that Dr. Nanda rightly mentioned in the previous discussion. There's just one slight point, Rakhi, that I want to mention on the vocational training part also, which I forgot, and it's all about employability, that I totally agree, precisely because if you may allow me to mention one example, you know, in our days, there used to be an SUPW classes. Now that SUPW classes in the current existing education system, I think that was also very well planned, you know, in having ideas, innovative ideas for the new education system. But actually, apart from me, thankfully, I learned how to sew my own clothes. Yeah, and do not have to go to the tailor in every chota mota torn clothes. But, you know, I feel we have to really define where actually our vocational skills come in from, who teaches, and where does it lead a student? Is it just a document on paper saying that she has learned tailoring, you know, etc., etc.? So that is a very important issue that we have to discuss, because in the Northeastern region, I know and I've heard from friends and relatives, SUPW for them would be just walking on the grass and cutting the grass. I mean, that's absurd, you know. But and the danger here is, if we face the same reality today even with the new education policy, then there is a point that we have to really concentrate on and how to work upon. Now, you were coming to this whole digitalization. And, you know, being a part of a university which has always been really for, you know, face-to-face learning, and I don't think I really have to say much on this, the digitalization is a boon in a certain sense, because you have internet connection in the deepest root, you know, rural areas of the country. But so also we really have to think about the digital divide. You know, this digital divide is huge. It is class-based division, I feel. Also because you cannot cater to a large number of students in the rural backward areas, not only in the Northeast, but several other parts of the country, you know. So that is one, the digital divide is huge. Now, you talked about the institutions like UGC, you meant the statutory bodies, right? The statutory bodies like UGC for the ICTE being clubbed together, and now you will have, according to the new education policy, you have this higher education. Yeah, so the HE Commission of India will be the one controlling the whole funding, administrative, bureaucratic procedures of all the universities. I really want to understand this also, because then does that mean, I would actually ask a question in a question to you back, and also for the discussion today. Does this mean that you have one Babu sitting on top and controlling all the fundings of the central universities and also the colleges and the district colleges, which actually then is not, you know, going to be achieved by the district colleges in small towns, because they won't be able to actually generate funds to run independently. then what does that situation then pertain? It pertains that you'll have to ask loans, huge amounts of loans, which can never be repaid. Now, if you want to repay, that actually is equivalent to high fee structure of the students. You know, everything is related and everything is connected. And hence, I think it's a very important point that you brought up. And Rakhi, that would be my concern. I do not, then that would directly lead to privatization. And you know, the private players, like, although they put it in a very sugar-coated word saying the civil society, yeah, the civil society will come into play, but this civil society, I would also like the current definition of what civil society is and how, what, you know, the paradigms and the definitions, which civil societies, and do private players come in between, and then, you know, how does it create? It creates a large privatization of education, which is a real concern for public universities such as the prevalent one today that we see. Thank you. That will be all for now.
Okay. Rakhi, are you there with us? I think her screen has frozen or something. No?
Yes, I think it has hanged or something.
Okay, so I think she will have to come back and join again. But before she does, I think you have answered it. But my submission here would be that I would like to look at the document more carefully. And I do not see everything be unfold immediately. That's my thing. I think we have to wait. And what will be the coordination? I think Dr. NDR Chandra is raising some questions. How will the coordinations take place? How will the voices be included? Which voices will be included? That is something we need to see. And however, when it comes to allocation of funds, I mean, we are governed largely by the UGC till now. So I do not see a major change in those fields. But what we may need to look at is, and I think the government is is aware of this, that the diversity in terms of digital learning is huge, and they are looking at what I feel. They are looking at ways to tackle it. But till it is tackled, we will have to engage with how best and what are the best ways of reaching the last person, the most marginalized person. Because it's not just about class. Let me also tell you, sometimes it could also be an intersectionality issue. It could be class, it could be gender, it could also be region. There are many regions now, due to floods, certain parts of Assam we could not reach out to. We have had issues with certain. However, largely there has to be and one thing that the NEP talks about, and I am looking at the positives here, is to look at mentoring. If mentoring means that we give large-scale support to all those students to whom we cannot reach out due to digital learning, that mentoring has to be looked at. And however, online learning is no substitute for physical classroom. Absolutely. And that in exchange and that interchange, you know, that knowledge, that cannot be wished away. The pandemic has brought to us online learning. Let us not forget that. It's not that online learning it came through a process.
It wasn't a choice.
Consultative. So it was a lockdown situation, not just the pandemic, but a lockdown situation necessitated for greater good that brought in an online. And we discovered certain opportunities, while we also found certain challenges. And we need to keep them separate, because the online courses that the NEP is talking about is not a large-scale online course for everybody. It is not. I mean, the NEP could not possibly have thought of that. So they are saying over and above, something like a blended learning, having some online courses. So that has to be worked out. I would say that while we all talk about large-scale participation, it is time for us to think of participatory democracy at the local levels. How much is our voice, you know, available in the local level? How can we raise within the college or within the university, how your voices are reaching, what part of consultative processes you are in? I find that way Delhi University very open, and consultations are there, teachers consultations are there. So, I mean, I think I would not like to give myself that kind of importance or significance at this stage. I'm only looking at my local spaces. I mean, humbly, I want to state that. So in that, I would like to look at my last, you know, the student who's not being reached out at all. So if I can't reach out to her, then what's the point of all these learning resources? So working on that part would be very important for all of us now, wherever we are located, whether as students. And I remember when you said SUPW, I remember it was socially useful, productive work. That is how it was called. SUPW.
Right.
So I think this is a time for many of us, especially because of the pandemic and also otherwise, to start thinking of empathy learning, of certain ways of empathy learning, certain ways of collaboration, not so much about competition, and socially useful product and sustainable lives. I'm glad you brought it up. Many of our generation, and I'm glad you also, have learned how to sew, and so these are things that these are life skills. So whether we can make that a part of our curriculum, whether it's an important part, and how do you engage with that. The other part is, of course, capacity building of faculty members, because even faculty members are not placed in the same spaces. There are different kinds of faculty members with different challenges, different opportunities. So how can we bring them? Having said that, I must also say the way in which teachers in India have risen to the occasion, and they have been teaching. I think it's hats off from schools to village schools to, and also being paid very little, being paid, and the schools are all functioning. I've also noticed that play schools are functioning. So teachers are there, and they are not even being paid the government rates, or so to say, whatever. I mean, they are working for a pittance, but they are bringing that online. So I feel their capacity building of teachers is important, but sensitivity has to be built in. So I noticed with great delight that gender and disability and gender mainstreaming is a large part of it. But just adding gender and stirring it is a problem. So it has to be more about who will mainstream it. In what ways will you mainstream it? What do you understand by gender? That is not a problem of the government. It is the problem even of teachers, even of parents. They don't understand gender at all. The way they engage with disability, they don't. So how can you bring about large-scale orientation? So orientation, awareness, we will need those. I believe the government is thinking of broad-based, online courses which can be disseminated everywhere. But what are the creative ways we can do that? And how also we can bring them back to campuses, have vibrant learning. You can't make friendships online, right? You have to be together, and that is the beautiful part about being part of higher educational institutions, the friendships you make, the connections you create, emotive connections. So how can both be done together? I think Rakhi hasn't joined back.
She isn't back. Is Anushka there?
Anushka?
Yes,
yes.
I think we have Rakhi ma'am with us, but she's probably on mute.
Just unmute her. I don't see her, so I'm just wondering.
Yeah,
I also don't see her.
Off somewhere. I don't know why.
Yeah, Rakhi's here now. Yeah, you got disconnected, Rakhi. I'm sorry, we answered some of your questions, but it's nothing that we shared that cannot. Yeah, it's just a kind of a rumination, you can say.
Yeah, we were just discussing and sharing each other's views in the same profession. So
I think Anushka, we can take questions actually from the participants.
Yeah.
So Rakhi, don't you want to just kind of wrap up with your words, and then Anushka can come in? Yeah, I thought it would be nice to do that. She there?
My video is am I visible also?
No, you're not visible, but we can hear you. You're audible.
Just speak.
Yeah, you can speak.
Okay.
You're audible.
Why my video is not there? I don't know.
That's okay. We've seen you.
Okay. So basically, I think there are a lot of questions, and I really feel that we have to also, look at a season 2 when we are talking about. Okay, start my video. I have started.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. Now we can see you.
Back again, yes. So yes, for digital learning, we'll have to wait a little when it really becomes near perfect, which I think is an ideal situation. But I think some of these notes that is coming from both of you are so experienced. Dr. Nanda, I have known your thoughts, and your thoughts are so full of optimism. Looks at when you talk about holistic learning, I think you really understand and you make others understand very well. And thank you for that, because I think this program, this talk show on new education policy is also about making everyone understand the simpler aspects of the policy and making it really, something useful for one and all. And that's why, we had this program and a talk show. I think we'll have another season also if there are more queries from students which are coming in. We will have maybe another session on it. Dr. Mercy, you talked about some very pertinent points. I think when Dr. Nanda talks about consultation, I think these are becoming the notes and a basis for consultation, which I'm sure in time we will be doing. So thank you so much for your thoughts. But I think we will be taking more questions, questions which are like, when are things going to happen? People are very eager to see as to how it all unfolds. Whether the new terms or the new policies that are being talked about is something that they can really relate to. So I think it's interesting to really make it simpler and understandable for all. And that's where we thought of having more participants and students asking questions also. And that's why I now give it to Anushka and maybe take over questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rakhi. Thank you, Herward.
Thank you, Rakhi.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll quickly take questions from our chat box. We have Tejaswini asking us, what new skills do you think teachers need to learn interdisciplinary teaching?
Okay. Should I take that?
Sure, ma'am.
Mercy?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
So I feel, and right now as I'm speaking, our teachers are taking training in Microsoft Teams, and they all expressed a desire to learn more skills. So there's a whole lot of interest in learning online platforms. People have been using it very, very effectively in the college. So there is a lot of interest that they have shown. That would be a new skill. But apart from that, I think in terms of interdisciplinary teaching, it's not about what you need to learn. What teachers will need to get over perhaps is the binaries between disciplines, and whether to create collaborative projects. Delhi University also is encouraging multidisciplinary research, so is UGC. So if there are ways that you can learn, like, you can learn together, that could be a very interesting way. And the Delhi University syllabus, if you look at it, the choice-based credit system already has a number of interdisciplinary courses which are offered, and students will know about it. So irrespective of that, there is still a binary distinction between the sciences and the humanities and the liberal arts. So how can we learn together? That could be one way. One way would be to join hands as a team. And I am inclined to agree, because coming from a feminist school of understanding, that the solidarity on gender issues, if we can create, and we could work together. For example, if I am working on disability and thinking of a project on gender and disability, then I would like to bring in some teachers from the science departments, from the physics maybe, others, to look at various methods that we can take out, some apps, some tools. Is there a way in which we can create those tools together? Those are the ways I think interdisciplinary learning has to be. I was noticing very lovely, examples of Saudi Arabia, also the UK, where a young man has made a robotic dog for the visually challenged that can be used. I think these are interesting learning, and if you can create that by interdisciplinary learning, but somebody has to support those projects. And there should be far more support for teachers to collaborate on research. So I think research labs, not just the labs that you see in the sciences, but multidisciplinary research labs can be created. And these multidisciplinary research labs should bring in teachers and students into it. And that learning should have implications for policy as well as for social change. For me, civil society is all of us. And I have looked at collaborations with Herward and others based on this purpose, for this purpose. Thank you, Siddhi.
Thank you, ma'am. If I may add, what I meant by interdisciplinary approach was, if tools like dramatics or for this instance, pottery can be used to teach core subjects like maths and science, that can be
absolutely using as much pedagogical tools. I mean, using films. I mean, I think my understanding, the way I used to look at maths, it changed when I saw the movie A Beautiful Mind. or when I see Sakuntala, the film that is made, which is an excellent film, my whole idea of what is maths changed, because I used to be personally very afraid of maths. So is there another way of engaging? And I feel that these are important learnings, and we have to find a foot into certain areas and raise our voice in a way in which consensus can be developed. I think we should explore. Yes, yes.
Can I add here when Tejasvi, if it's okay with you?
Yeah. And she asked a very pertinent question. Let me also share with you that, since one is...
Your voice, Rakhi, you are muted again.
Yes, Rakhi, you're muted. We cannot hear you.
IITs have started those sections like humanities. You're talking about dramatics. Learning of a different kind. I mean, you will see that IIT is not only scientific institutions. They have started these other disciplines where they're making, again, their students learn other creative skills. So there are
remember Rakia School of Life initiative.
Exactly.
Remember that, how we learned together. I mean, that was very interesting. We learned with the urban youth from around us, as well as college students, and we became facilitators, and the facilitators were all from the civil society. So we created graphic, we created cartoons, and we created comic strips to explain ideas around domestic violence. And they created, I think theater was one thing that you trained them on, Rakhi, and you created, I think, media, newspaper, a community newspaper you trained them on.
And so what an experience it was. Actually, maybe share that experience with others. So Tejaswini, I think you should take a lot of heart in the fact, and I equally share Dr. Nanda's fear of maths.
Rakhi, if I may make a few points here, Rakhi, sorry to interrupt you like that. Tejasvi, I would like to actually bring in the discussion of interdisciplinarity before we discuss on the need to learn and what kind of skills. First and foremost is important. We have to define which teachers, and if it's a school level teachers, you have university teachers, because coming from a background of a central university, one has always this multidisciplinarity, and interdisciplinarity is not actually something new. You always have a subject offering as and be offered as an optional course. For example, if I may say so, according to my experience as a foreign language teacher here, I teach German as a foreign language. Now, if in German as a foreign language, while learning the undergrad courses, I went and took an optional called Yoga Sutra. It was the Sanskrit Center. So, there are interdisciplinarity studies, and it's not only that. It's not only in the humanities or in the social sciences. I would also say that we have, as teachers, when I became a teacher, I introduced foreign language learning through theater. You have various theater groups and theater classes in our, present university. So there are several ways. And also a very important point that Dr. Nanda raised, the funds. How will this come? But before the funds, I would like to say, if you want to introduce research labs for teachers, not only specifically to this of the science background, if you want to concentrate on social sciences, teachers of the social sciences, I would say, you actually develop your library systems. You develop your library systems into digitally accessible libraries at homes. You increase the amount of books that are, that can be lended, read all across the country. And you create a portal wherein every student of any particular subject, be it the sciences, I don't think there should be any binary separations of the sciences and the humanities also, because then you have one such subject known as the philosophy, which combines both worlds completely, in various ways of civilization. So I think libraries will be a very important, and training into library, digitalization of books, all these things are actually coming into very skilled, managed and developed interdisciplinary how do you say, capabilities of the teachers. That is one.
If I may add, I conducted an experiment here with schools I'm affiliated with. My company is affiliated with schools. So we decided to use the resources that we already have. So if somebody had skill of maybe, you know, making rangoli, drawing rangoli is a very good way of teaching geometry.
Exactly. That's wonderful. And for example, if you want to teach a foreign...
Make small skits to teach, I don't know, concepts from science, or an entire play can be made out of a history chapter.
You're absolutely correct.
Let's make it interesting. And we have resources with us. Kids are a resource in themselves. I think we have to start using them.
Okay. So can we, Anushka, can we go to the next question? Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Tejasvi.
Yes, ma'am. I'll just quickly move over to the next question. We have John asking us about the situation with the MPhil program. Like, will it be affected because of the NEP 2020? And why don't all these central universities convert the MPhil program into a full-fledged PhD program? That's his question. Either of you could take it, ma'am.
Dr. Nanda, if you could take it first, and then I will add a few points.
For those who are currently, do you think it holds any, what is it? Why don't we? Okay. Well, I think the current MPhil program has to hold value. I mean, they are already there. This will only be implemented later. It is not implemented yet. You can't just rubbish a MPhil program. In JNU, I think it is a joint program, MPhil and PhD, right? If I understand correctly. There are some direct PhDs, but it is already there. Whereas other central universities may consider that. I think it's a good point that John is raising, that it's a good point that all other programs should think of it. Otherwise, these students, because MPhil also requires a lot of work. It is also, it's almost like you're halfway into a PhD with your MPhil degree. You write a thesis for your MA, it is equally important. And when you're writing for MPhil, it is equally engaging. I mean, you have to come with a synopsis, you have to work towards it. So they can't be left in the lurch. So they have, definitely it has to work towards a full-fledged PhD program. And those who are now joining, they can get into a program which is, which will, I think the number of years will not change much. Because if MPhil is being seen as redundant, then a large part of the research methodology learning has to be done at the level of the full-fledged PhD program, as it is done in the US and other parts. You enter into a, I think that's an important point. More than that, I mean, will it hold any value next year? See, I think it has to hold a value till the policy is implemented. So I wouldn't say that it doesn't hold a value, but if you are applying for a PhD program this time, I would request you to look at it differently, because you shouldn't look at MPhil programs anymore. They won't be offered. So right now you should be concentrating if you're thinking of research. But again, I would request young people who are doing research here, not so much the research scholar who's raising the question. They're already there and he's a consultant with the NHRC. So I'm not raising that. But young people who are thinking of research, be very clear about your research goals. Because do not enter into in a PhD program without actually having a certain understanding of what it will mean. It's an isolated journey. It requires a certain kind of commitment and passion. So you should have that. It's your story that you're going to be telling. So I would suggest that do not enter a PhD program until you are completely sure. Do talk to a few of your faculty members. Do talk to people who will be guiding you at least beforehand. I would say first think of the topic, go to people, talk about it before you enter into a program. So in terms of counseling, I would say that one is, of course, you know, you are reading something, you're passionate about it, you're thinking of a theme, but please go thrash it out. Do not expect it to ultimately lead to some form of employability. It may not. We do not know how the world will shape out ultimately out of this pandemic into God knows what else will happen next. So we have to be very careful where we are going with our journey. So if you have a PhD in mind, then please talk out with faculty members and discuss, debate, find your topic, find that space, and then get into it. Right now, I wouldn't worry so much. DU has a separate MPhil and PhD program. So and other central universities too, but JNU probably must. I mean, you can bear me out on this. JNU probably has a full-fledged program which enters into a PhD. So for them, it might be easier.
So it's like that. I think are you done, Dr. Nanda? Can I? Yeah. Okay. So I think the 4-year entry-exit, 4-year graduation program, which is introduced in the new NEP, actually caters to, if not compensate, the 2-year MPhil into, developing a student's research skills to directly go into master's and then PhD. Probably that is the vision. I'm not sure. But what I want to actually add in what you've already rightly said is, of course, the continuing students of MPhil who are in their first year or in their final year of MPhil wanting to submit their dissertations, I don't think it will affect them largely. It is only when this whole direct MA plus the direct PhD is implemented, it is only then that this thing will come in. Now, having said that, since Rakhi in the introductory, in her introduction said that I would want to concentrate, I should be concentrating on the Northeastern region to a certain extent. I feel, in my experience, also coming from these regions, I feel that the bridging the gap of a research inabilities of a student is actually enhanced during the MPhil days. And I think that is my apprehension there in completely doing away with the MPhil. I would still raise a question mark, because for many of the students, socially backward, economically backward, or even if a student is not socially or, economically backward, MPhil in a program, in the nature of the program, helps you to hone your skills for research. Like you said, discuss, understand what you actually want to research upon, because you cannot compare such a diverse country like India and the kind of researches which goes on here when you actually go to a global country. For example, I have been a PhD student in Germany. Now, the kind of researches that these people have, in the sense of even within the undergraduate program, it's totally different. It's actually very, very different. You have your resources. Even with the available resources here in India, it becomes difficult because you are not trained to think in terms of, how would you continue with your academic endeavors, your research questions, what is your hypothesis, etc. So for that space, I think doing away with the MPhil program in the new NEP should be more, largely discussed. And if not, even if you have from master's towards direct PhD, into direct PhD, I think what is important is to understand that you create your master programs in such a way that you really are clear of wanting to, study further, wanting to do a research, wanting to get a doctoral degree. So there we have to be very clear. Our lines, our definition of what a master's program is and what a PhD program should be clear, because this bridging the gap stage of 2 years MPhil program is going to be done away with according to the new NEP. Then we really have to rethink of how our research further studies is going to actually be affected.
Okay. So any next question? Also, one little question from my side here is that, we are also looking at, when you're talking about urban-rural divide, also divide on the basis of class, caste, of course, gender. Let's say National Scholarship Portal, which is being talked about, we're looking at, SC, ST, OBC, and other groups. So are we really reaching to the bottom and really touching that point where we never reached actually in the new education policy? We are really including each one of us, and it's very comprehensive in its whole idea actually. How would you look at it? Okay, Dr. Nanda, maybe.
I think I did, when you got disconnected, I did speak about this. I did say that I'm not going to talk about it. It's a vision document. I'm sure that's the idea. The idea is to reach out to everyone, and that's the hope also. But having said that, I will only look at it from our perspective, from being in the chair of a college at this point of time as an acting principal. I can only say that much. So while I'm looking at it, I would look at it individually. You have to emphasize on a mentorship program, and the mentorship program, which is part of the NEP, which is an important part of the NEP, that has to be worked out well. And I would rather have mentorship within the organization. rather than just outside, because teachers as mentors is already a part of the Delhi University system. Having them from outside, I don't know whether those connectivities can be formed properly. So having as many mentors inside so that we are able to reach out to everyone. What we have done in the college, and I can, if you allow me to share, we have seen to it that teachers reach out in whatever ways possible. Are we able to reach everyone? Not yet, but we are trying our best. So that is the only thing you can do. You're striving on an online mode, but I am not imagining that all of this is going to be on an online mode. I'm imagining the NEP will not be on an online mode. It will be in the physical classroom. And when it is in the physical classroom, I agree with Mercy. Biggest thing that we need to work on is so that every person in the campus is able to access teaching, learning materials very easily. We in the college are working on the digital library total, and I agree with you. See, the idea is if everybody can get the same resources as the other person, then at least the equality of resources would triumph. Once, equality of opportunities you give them, then you give them equalities of resources. Equality of outcome is something you and I cannot ensure at this stage. But if it is equality of opportunities and equality of resources, we should be able to. I would think what should appear from the NEP is that there should be manuals or modules for each institution, like higher educational institution, colleges, state universities. Manuals should be created, and we as a educational institution or as a policy center or her world, they should create these small manuals and provide it as a platform of action to the government. I'm sure there are openings. We all have our own little networks. We reach out. The democratic system is always fragmented in such a way that we can enter. So I would say young people's voices, how they are recorded, how they are in Miranda House through the Policy Center and Gender Lab, that's our purpose. That we bring together, whatever it is, give the youth a platform of action, bring together what is the recommendations they are making, and whether we can present it to policymakers. Now, whether it will be accepted or not, that's too early for us to say. I would like to move with some amount of hope that we have to reopen some spaces for dialogue.
That's a very good line to take on from, spaces for dialogue. Any more questions? Because I see some questions coming in.
Yeah, ma'am, I have a question. Yeah, can you hear me loud and clear?
Dr. Archana Bhattacharya is asking a question.
Yeah, sure, please.
So can somebody read it out?
Archana Bhattacharya's question. Dr. Bhattacharya, hello. Bhattacharya, hello, hi. Good to see you here. Looking at your great work that you're doing. Yes, I agree. Even for me, for example, I was learning a lot of things through this webinar itself. Like Dr. Mercy's point about how language courses are taught. What are the kind of openings? I think you're very right. Anushka herself has written a very succinct piece in her world, where she has discussed the new education policy very well, and her world has I think you should share it with everyone. I think you should share it right now with everyone because I think that's a way of orienting. At every local level, the government should ask them, or at least request them, please hold orientation, and people should be there to help us through or walk us through. So once that orientation is done, once that induction is done, maybe her world should take up that work. They should talk to UGC or to the authorities in place, and Rakhi has a number of networks through which she can, and say that we would like to take up a few orientation programs or induction programs, and whether it is possible for us to do it. We are happy to collaborate. Miranda is happy to collaborate with you, and we can then call in the people who have contributed to be part of it. And therein, people just like you are questioning, therein there is the space of dialogue. I have seen, and I would like to admit that people are open to questions in a dialogue form. I don't want to rule it out at this stage.
So yes. Nakul, I think Nakul had a question. Nakul is the, I think right now the male voice which is coming in.
Yeah, hi ma'am, it's been an honor to listen to your discussion on education policy that we have and India, and what we got to know, we understand that there's whenever a policy is needed, it is either trying to create a new system or trying to bring a new reform, which was lacking system, right? I feel that is there anything that is coming up to streamline the education structure where we can impart an education which is needed? Because every student have a different IQ, right? Some people are technically good, some people are like more good towards journalism, some are inclined towards the digital creativity. So is there anything that is coming up, like major number of departments are being made across in this policies, that there would be different departments doing different lining up the work. So, but where is that streamlined structure where we would recognize the different IQ or different set of students and impart education? Because now we need a skill-based learning, which is somewhere down missing in, we have Skill India, but still it's not working in that direction where we can have a section of people who work in different genre, right? Some are good at technical. So there's something new coming up in this policy for that.
Yeah. I think we talked about it in a way, Dr. Nanda. We talked about holistic learning. We talked about skill-based, vocation-based learning. I think, Nakul, if I can speak here, is that the new education policy, actually what you're saying is looking at it. It is looking at, looking at the overall, elements in the personality of an individual, not only purely as a student who sits on a chair and a table and reads, and that is what not education is all about. It is looking at a picture which is more comprehensive of a person, of an individual, and then making a career out of wisdom and education both. So, but Dr. Nanda and Dr. Mercy are there. They are better knowledgeable to talk about it.
I think you have summarized it well. I'm glad, Nakul. Hi. It's good to see you after a long time. And that's a very articulate question. I thought you wouldn't be interested in education. So it's good to see you here. It's good to see that's what civil society has shown an interest because of the new education policy. I think what your point about whether we should be assessing students, how we should be evaluating students, that's a very important point. Because one of the things that the NEP is giving us some promise on is that we are not going to be focused so much on rote learning, and we are going to look at other yardsticks for measurement of merit. Now, what are those yardsticks going to be? I'm very curious to know, because I'm personally a great believer of that. Never ever being one of those students who reported to being the best in science or in maths, and I feel that excellence, how it can be measured, and whether we are really aiming for excellence. So it's right. I think Bercy right at the beginning said that how is it going to unfold? What is it, the implementation process? How are you going to really do it? It's one thing to say, but how will you really act on it? So evaluation is very, very important, because many of our young people have mental health issues because of not getting through a particular entrance, having anxiety disorders because of the kind of curriculum that is there. How are we going to engage with that? And this kind of a holistic learning should also decrease the burden on students to perform in a competitive mode. So are we going to look at more teamwork? Are we going to look at experiential learning, how it will apply to the field, so to say, and whether it will bring about social change? We are now a part of the Unnat Bharat Abhiyan of the government. Which is like you adopt about 5 villages. And I had never expected the kind of, interest that young people have shown. They all want to be a part. They want to learn. They want to be, it's not a beneficiary relationship. They also want to learn from the village. And there is so much to learn from the village, especially what Mercy was telling you, learning to sew. So how they work with the, the pandemic has also taught us that we don't need so many things. How can we make our lives more sustainable? How can we be kinder human beings? How can we be more empathetic to the other? I mean, the kind of exodus we saw of the migrants, and we only saw that, but I'm sure there's a lot of kindness that civil society members have shown, and I have seen. I'm sure from the government there has been huge support, but non-governmental organizations, young people, everybody was reaching out, everyone in different ways. So is that something we can hone? Are those talents that I would like you to judge by? If I'm going to give you a certificate of merit, should I not do that on the fact that you are more ethical, that you are more empathetic, that you are more open to democracy? I think that is where the more we give importance to measurement of emotional intelligence, we may create a better society. As an educationist, that's my understanding.
Thanks, Mark. That makes me more clear. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Emotional intelligence is what we need. And do we have more questions, Anushka, before we now looking at?
Ma'am, we have one question which we seem to have skipped. We were asked if, so since Manipur has about 30 languages and dialects, so like when you're talking about, you know, having a 3-language formula, how exactly does it pan out?
I think Mercy should answer that question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought so. I thought so. That would be a question directed to me. Yeah, that's obvious. But what I think I've already mentioned when we were discussing the 3-language proposal in the new education policy, that's exactly my point. For example, if in a school, if you take this district of Churachandpur, for an example, in Manipur, it's a district in Manipur. Now, in the district of Churachandpur, you have more than 50 to more than 100 schools, wherein if a student is going to be taught from the pre-primary level till the standard 5th, or it can be till the class 8, supposedly it says in the document. Now, how are you going to choose the language? How many regional languages? And you are completely right. I think, I don't know the person who was asked this question. So basically for the Northeastern perspective, I think then English or any other universal language, particularly now, let's be very honest, it has to fall back into English, actually plays a greater role than, you know, pleasing the regional inhabitants, in the sense of it might create, actually, on the other hand, a clear ethnic rivalry again, you know, on the basis of languages, because you are so rich in regional languages, you are so rich in ethnic languages. You have several tribal languages, and which are recognized by the government of India in the 6th schedule. Now, and I think this is a very important point to discuss when we talk about the government wanting to introduce the medium of instruction in the regional or the mother tongue. So that is a question I precisely asked in the beginning of the discussion when I said, whose language? Whose mother tongue are we talking about? Out of the 13 tribal languages, which are 13 or 15 tribal languages which are recognized in Manipur. So whose language are you going to use? And even if the teacher is trained in all the languages, let's say, a person who speaks more than 12 languages, do you have the sufficient books? Do you have the sufficient books which are published in the particular subject? Yeah, like in geography or maths, your social studies. Or your maths is published in that particular language. So there's a huge question mark. So one, I think we have to be really clear on how we put across even our very promising policies. Like Dr. Nanda rightly said, it is and what I have actually emphasized in the beginning, it's actually more to do with the implementation, more to do with clarity, more to do with the intricacies of the plans. And also the question raised by Mr. Chandra when he said, are educationists, linguists. Now I'm coming to the way forward now after the discussion, since our topic was way forward. I think what we all are discussing from the beginning of the talk is how are we going to look at it? And for all of us, even us teachers and professors in universities, the 66 odd pages of the new education policy seems to be Greek, Hebrew, Latin for us sometimes, because there are several tiny little questions that which is raised every time when we read a particular theme. So I think this is very important, the aspect of languages, be in terms of regional languages, be in terms of the medium of instruction in metropolitan cities, be it the medium of instruction in foreign language institutions where, you know, then which actually gets me to this point, then does foreign language, if a student learning in a rural area, in case there are Kendra Vidyalayas and German institutions and organizations have introduced through PASH and INDAF, the German language as one of the subjects to be held in the school level. Now, if he or she a student takes this foreign language as the 4th or the 3rd elective or optional subject, so how do we draw the line? So these are the pertinent questions that we all should be addressing. And I think the person who's asked the question is very, very correct. I should credit that person. And as English to be the language, it is still now, this is the medium of instruction in most of the school, even in the rural areas of most of the northeastern parts.
Sure.
So Rakhi, I think one point I would like to say, since we are wrapping up, just one point. In terms of way forward, I would again like to emphasize on what we can do rather than what can be done. So what can we do? One that is coming out from your discussion here is that many people would like an understanding on the new education policy in terms of what is it, the 66 pages or whatever it is, how is it? Even people don't know that. When they say Greek, Latin or Hebrew or whatever the language may be, they do not understand it. Many of us don't. So if that, which Anushka has already shared, maybe that is where Mirata House as an institution can tie up with her world, and we can create more orientation or induction by bringing in policymakers, bringing in civil society agencies, bringing in people who are also critical on the policy. If they can add something more to it, we can bring everybody together on a platform and we can discuss it, and young people can ask their questions, their queries, their confusions, their worries. All of that can be raised. I thought that was one in terms of platform. One thing, so I think we should join hands on that. The other point that is important is I would be concerned, because I, heading a women's college, and since her world is about gender, what do they mean when they say they will include gender? And just like Dr. Mercy is raising the question of the northeastern regions as a specific domain of her interest and her expertise, I think I would like to know how will gender pan out? What is the way in which it will be mainstream? Whether we can play a role in it. How can we play a role in it in terms of ethnicity? So that would be important. So I can see Dr. Archana Bhattacharjee is here. There are others also. Mrs. Patwardhan is here. Some of them can give us. You should collect as many recommendations as possible from within the participants who are here, and we can create a recommendation page and send it. There's no harm in that. Sure. We all assume that nobody is listening, but the point is, I have always felt that we should continue to write, and it should always, it cannot always be about, it can also be about how are we going to engage? What is the role we will play in that? How will we facilitate? So all of that can be done.
I think a large, a variety of people have joined this particular talk show, and I'm really thankful to each one of them because it really matters to us. We've just started, and I think everyone's participation and their being there itself means a lot to us. And Dr. Nanda, thank you so much for reaching out to us for this idea that we should come together and we should have a series of such interactions with policymakers and people of experience and eminence to talk about issues that concern us all. Thank you so much. And I really, my team is here and we've all listened to that, and we'll work on that with you. And that is what I think we began by talking, whether Dr. Archana Bhattacharjee is there, Tejaswini, Dr. Mercy, that solidarity is what is also part of our whole education system. If you also look at the women and how they contributed to our whole educational framework in the past as well. So I think it's been very enriching personally to me also, because as we are trying to demystify, understand NEP 2020, we'll have to have more discussions on how it's going to pan out actually. And so thank you so much. I think, Anushka, we have come to an end.
Yes, ma'am.
I really don't feel like
Thank you, Rakhi. Thank you, Anushka. And thank you, Dr. Nanda.
Ma'am, I would now like to request Ninglun ma'am to for the vote of thanks. And before that, I think we've all posted the social media handles on the chat screen as well as on the main screen. So I would request all of you to go through our work and support us through partnerships and talks like these. And I now request Ninglun ma'am to kindly take over. Ninglun ma'am, do we have you with us? Yeah.
Me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
For the vote of thanks, yeah.
I can't hear.
You're audible, ma'am.
I can't hear you.
We are listening to you.
My link is off. I can't hear.
We can hear you clearly, Ninglun.
That's all right. Maybe she'll take a couple of more seconds or minutes. So basically, I mean, as I said also, Dr. Mercy, and before Ninglun actually comes on, are you there, Ninglun? I can see you. I can see and hear you.
I'll try calling her up in.
Yeah. Can you hear me? I can't hear. I don't know what's happening with my audio. It suddenly happened.
That's
so are we done?
We have seen you, and I think you. I mean, I can represent.
I cannot hear anything. Yeah.
I can represent Ninglun and thank all of you because especially, we wanted to have all kinds of voices. So of course, Dr. Nanda, who leads this, Women's College, a premier institution, #1, and with that, we again and again keep congratulating her. Dr. Mercy, you brought so many new perspectives and I think notes to take home actually. The very, very significant points that will be discussed and consulted upon. Thank you so much. I think this talk show has really been my own classroom where one has taken notes, and thank you so much for doing that. And also holistic in terms of bringing new ideas to what we can do in future and how we can look at holistically in NEP and how it pans out, So thank you so much. And on behalf of Ninglun, I would say that because Ninglun also is from Manipur, I think these are the voices that should reach out to all corners of our country. We want to include each one into this education journey, and we welcome everyone out here. And and that's what inclusivity and equality will be all about.
Thank you so much, Rakhi. Thank you, Anushka. Thank you, the whole team of Her World, for inviting me to be one of the panelists. I think speaking for, which Gayatri Spivak actually talks about in her study of post-colonial studies, who speaks for whom is also very important in the new education policy. When we talk about merit and non-merit, when we actually talk about all merit, eyeing towards merit educational system, we should also take care that, we are actually talking against the reservation, which will largely affect the Northeast and many other parts of the country. So speaking for, I was actually interrupting you, Rakhi, because you said I was speaking for Ninglun. I love it. And I thought inclusivity point actually is contradicted there, but yes, I understand this is the digital age right now. It is the pandemic. So thank you so much. And I thank the whole team and Dr. Nanda. It's been a pleasure being, at par in the panel with you. I mean, it's wonderful. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you. I learned a lot from you, Dr. Mercy. And I also would like to congratulate Rakhi, Ms. Rakhi Bakshi, Anushka and Ninglun for bringing in her. Because it's also, when you say who speaks for whom, it's so wonderful that that ability. And Rakhi, I have known her for a very long time. I want to tell the house also, she has always excelled in this. She doesn't reach out to the most popular or the most known and the person who's speaking for everyone. Rather, she reaches out to those who can, and it's very humbling in that sense. So therefore I just spoke on the issues that I am familiar with. I did not want to speak for others. So my main focus was on the educational institution I work with. And I would again like to say that it's been a huge pleasure in these pandemic times. I wish you all good health and safety. Let us meet, and in terms and in the light of feminist solidarity, let's be there for each other.
Yes, march on.
Yes,
let's march on. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
As Dr. Nanda said, pandemic, yes, but I think this crisis makes us stronger, as I always feel. And these are the new insights we are gaining. And this talk show would continue with new issues, and we'll keep involving you. Thank you, and Anushka.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
And all my team members, I thank you all also.
Thanks to the participants also. Great.
Thank you. Stay safe, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you.
A big thank you.
Oh, I could not see Ninglun today. I could not hear her. She was looking so nice and sitting there, and I could not speak to her also because her line got disconnected. Now it's oh, there you are. Hi. Can you hear us now?
Thank you, Dr. Nanda.
Okay,
Thank you,
hi,
Dr. Mercy.
Hi, so nice to see you.
Thank you so